Perspective is everything. You remember those pictures you used to see at the little stands in the mall that had just the dots everywhere? And it just looked like some weird kind of geometrical shape kind of thing. And you're supposed to stand there and focus on a certain point and then back your... I could never get it right. I just was the guy in the mall as a kid looking like a moron. But I'm told that there's actually something there. But it had to do with perspective and how you focused. Perspective provides us all kinds of useful information in life. Sometimes it's seeing a problem from a different perspective, and we understand how to overcome that problem because of that. Sometimes it's seeing conflict through the eyes of the other person that helps us get around that sticking point. Sometimes the perspective of a map gives us the big picture or the vantage of a high point above the tree line where we can see where we left the trail. Perspective at times lets us look back on difficult times and trying times in our life and make sense of why life happened that way. There's a video that was floating around the internet a while back. It was of actor Rainn Wilson. He is the character Dwight Schrute on the show The Office. And it's him on an airplane sitting next to someone who is watching The Office. And they are just cracking up. And they have Rainn Wilson, the main character that they're laughing at, and he's just got his camera over here going, you know, like he just finds it hilarious that they're oblivious that he's right there, and they don't have the perspective to know he's actually right. I mean, how cool would that be, right? To be a fan of the show and your actor's right there. Another story, Keanu Reeves was sitting on a plane with a lady, and she just chats him up the whole way there. She has no clue who he is, until somebody at the end of the flight comes up and wants to get his autograph, and all of a sudden it clicks for her. Like, imagine sitting next to Neo from The Matrix and you forgot to take your red pill that day. Like, that's the level of miss that this was. This morning, we're gonna be in Matthew chapter 17. This is the transfiguration we'll be talking about. So go ahead and turn there in your Bibles. I have to say, when I was planning this series, this was one of the passages I was least looking forward to, because I said, what am I going to do with this passage? It's just a little bit different, as you'll see in a second. Let's read starting in verse 1. It says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother, and he led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good we are here. If you wish, I'll make 3 tents, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my beloved son with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified, but Jesus came and touched them, saying, rise and have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Wow, what a story. There's a cloud, there's these 2 Old Testament characters who show up. They hear a voice. Jesus, his face, his clothes start shining like a light. It's all a little bit trippy. It's like a scene out of a movie if Cecil B. DeMille and Charlton Heston were writing like an Old Testament Power Rangers or something. This is just this scene where something different happened. I mean, up until this point, the stories have been fairly normal. Jesus is a man who's born to a family, right? Just like anybody else is born to a family. He walks around like anybody. I mean, there's all these things where it's just like anyone else. He has some miracles. There's some miracle stories, but this one is just... it's different in category. It's not just a miracle that he is performing. This is something that's surrounding him. This story happens 6 days after Jesus foretelling his resurrection and telling his disciples that they have to deny themselves and take up their cross and follow him. This story is so unique in the text that if you just start studying different scholars on this topic, you'll come up with a wide range of opinions. One person summarized it this way. He said, the transfiguration has been described by various scholars as a misplaced story of Jesus's resurrection, as a misplaced story of his second coming, or his heavenly enthronement, and or his ascension. So it has all of these kind of very high moments wrapped up into this story, to the degree where scholars who maybe don't believe that Matthew wrote it as it is written would say, oh, someone took this later and just kind of cut and paste it into here, and that's why it sort of feels weird. I hope as we study the text this morning, you're going to see it's actually not weird. It's right where it belongs because that's where God wanted it to be. So Jesus takes the inner circle of his disciples to witness this event. Matthew 17:1 tells us that this is 6 days later after his time in Caesarea Philippi. And so they haven't, if they've gone anywhere, they haven't gone that far. And so the question is kind of, where are they? What is the Mount of Transfiguration? They go up on a mountain. Which mountain is it? The traditional site is Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is, I say it's traditional site. What that means when you're looking at anything in kind of modern Israeli architecture, archaeology, is what that means is someone in the 3rd or 4th century built a monastery there, and that makes it the traditional site. And then what you'll also learn if you go to Israel is that someone else built another monastery at some other site, and that is the traditional site. So sometimes just saying something is the traditional site just means somebody built something there about 150 years, 200 years after the time of Jesus, which doesn't really tell us anything. If they got it right, yes. If they didn't, it didn't. So it's Mount Tabor. This is just a little bit southwest of the Sea of Galilee. So if you're looking at a map of Israel and you've got the Sea of Galilee there, and you just kind of look a little bit off the southwest edge of it, that's where Mount Tabor is. It's about 50 miles from Caesarea Philippi. It certainly could be the site. I mean, 50 miles in 6 days, even at a leisurely pace, that's a very doable distance. It's not that hard. But the mountain's only about 1,900 feet elevation, so it's not exactly, in the text it's described as a tall mountain. That's not exactly a tall mountain. That's about average for where Mount Tabor is. And so, I don't know, I don't personally think it was there. Not that it really matters that much, but some people think, well, maybe it's Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is kind of in the immediate vicinity of where Jesus was at Caesarea Philippi. So he went up there and he's declaring the gates of hell will not prevail against it. I talked about that religious site that was dedicated to Pan and how people believe that was the site where it joined the underworld and our world together. But the issue with that is that's a little bit more remote. In Mark's version of this story, it talks about when they came back down, that crowds greeted them, and among these crowds were scribes and Pharisees, which this was where Mount Hermon is, where Caesarea Philippi is. This is kind of off the beaten path for there to be scribes and Pharisees. Also, Mount Hermon is 9,200 feet. Not that Jesus and his disciples couldn't have climbed a mountain that large. Also doesn't mean they have to go all the way up. It doesn't say they're on the summit. But that does seem a little bit too grand maybe for the scale of what they're doing. It is interesting, though, that there's a very historic, a very diverse history of religious ideas behind this place. On this mountain and around this mountain, there were about 20 different temples from various time periods, from the Greeks, from the Romans, from pagan times. And so this was a very religiously diverse mountain. There's one other mountain that people think it might be, and that's Mount Meron. This is on its way from Caesarea Philippi to Capernaum, which is where they're headed next. It's 3,900 feet, which maybe would fit still a large mountain. It's the largest mountain in the borders, in the actual borders of Israel, at least as we understand the borders today. And on this mountain, there were 2 synagogues on the mountain, so that could possibly be a place where you might find scribes and Pharisees to interact with after the story. And so it doesn't really change the meaning on which mountain these are. It's just kind of an interesting to think about. But Jesus is transfigured before them. What is that? If you look up the word, well, transfigured means changed. And you say, well, that doesn't really help me a whole lot. That doesn't explain sort of what is happening here. The Greek word is metamorphos, which we get our obvious word, English word, metamorphosis. And so you think of, a caterpillar becoming a beautiful butterfly. That was the story. Sorry. Last night, I was talking with Christy. It's like earlier this week, I thought of a great opener, and I didn't write it down. I was driving in the car, and I didn't write it down. And I forgot it. And I just remembered it. You saw it. Yeah, it was the scene from Bug's Life where I'm a beautiful butterfly. I can't do the accent right, though, so I couldn't really sell that one with conviction. Sorry. Aside. Anyway, we think of metamorphosis, we think of the Toy Story, the caterpillar, the fat caterpillar that becomes the beautiful butterfly, where he's still basically the caterpillar with the tiny itty-bitty wings. So this word also kind of just means to change or to transform. This word has 4 uses in the New Testament. two of these uses are in relation to this transfiguration story. To use, it's translated as transfigured, to be changed in this way. And in this sense, it means to be changed in a manner that's visible to others. Had you been standing there like the disciples, you would have seen his face shining. You would have seen his clothes shining. You would have heard the voice and seen and felt and smelt, and all the senses that would have been activated, those would have been happening for you. It's an external, visible thing. There's two more references, though, in the New Testament, and these are actually speaking of our own metamorphosis, our own changing or transformation. Romans 12:2 is one of these. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. By testing, you may discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. 2 Corinthians 3:18 also says, and we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree to another. Both of these references have this idea that it's an inward kind of change to our character. Right, so in Jesus' case, it's something that we're seeing externally of his body changed for them. In our case, when it's describing us, it's an internal change that's happening. Be transformed in our inward being, have our mind being renewed and becoming more like Christ's mind. In Greek culture, this word is used to describe the Greek gods and goddesses, how they might appear sort of in their heavenly court, where the humans are not, where the humans can't go or can't see. And so in order to interact with some human, they take on a kind of humanly form for the sake of interacting and interjecting themselves into the storyline. In the Old Testament, there's actually a number of occurrences that kind of fit this pattern, even though the Old Testament is older than these Greek examples. For example, there's times where God takes on the appearance of human forms. Genesis 18 talks about 3 visitors coming and visiting Abraham. And it's clear in the story that one of the visitors is God kind of interjecting himself in human form and having a dialogue with Abraham about what he's about to do, about to destroy the city. There's a lot of angel of the Lord references, for instance, in the book of Joshua, where it talks about the angel of the Lord, and then very subtly in the text it'll say, the Lord said, and so you see where sometimes that character is portrayed as God in some kind of tangible form. In the book of Daniel, there's the 3 of them are thrown into the fiery furnace, and a 4th person appears, and everyone outside the furnace is going, wait, what is going on? Who is this person? It's clear in the text, this person is God who is ministering to them. There's also times where God takes on the form of something physical, of some kind of object, or even if he doesn't take the form, he at least is animating that object. For instance, Abraham is told to make a sacrifice, and God causes this sleep to fall on him. This is Genesis 15. And a fire goes between the sacrifice and consumes it. And it's clear from the text, this fire was the presence of God. The burning bush with Moses and the voice that comes out of it. This was God in that story. God manifests himself in lightning and fire and rumbling sounds on Mount Sinai when Moses receives the 10 Commandments. And God even manifests himself to Elijah in a strong wind at the end of a difficult spiritual battle that he went through. In all of these Old Testament examples, God is appearing to humans in a way that they could see and hear. He's trying to make his divine form into something that is tangible and understandable, because we can't actually comprehend God through our senses. We can't, touch, see, taste, etc. We can't do that unless he allows us to, unless he puts himself in some kind of form. But in the case of Jesus' transfiguration, it's the opposite. Here, Jesus, who has always been truly God in human form, is now trying to show them who he really is. They had always sensed him to be a man. They understood his place of birth. They heard him speak with the language that they spoke. They saw him do every kind of thing that they did. But now in this story, they're getting to see a different side of who he is. His face shines. It's like Moses' face shone when he came down from the mountain. There's this manifestation of the law and the prophets through Elijah and Moses, and they hear God's voice. Their understanding of him has been growing all along as story by story, day by day, he is continuing to show them who he is. In the previous chapter, chapter 16, there's the interaction he has with Peter where he's trying to push Peter a little bit. Who do they say that I am? Who do you say that I am? You're Christ, Son of the living God. right? So they're getting the picture. They're starting to understand. Verse 2 says that his face and his clothes shone with light. Revelation 1, John describes for us a vision that he has. Starting in verse 13, it says, in the midst of the lampstands, one like the Son of Man, clothed with a long robe and a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white like wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sharp two-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining in full strength. His face was like the sun. Here, Jesus is pictured in that same way. Verse 3 and 4 tells us that in the midst of this scene of Jesus kind of transforming and emitting light in some kind of way, that Elijah and Moses appear. Peter gets really excited by all of this. In fact, he interrupts. He's kind of just, I think he's nervous with what's going on, and he's trying to fill the space with something. He interrupts and he says, look, let me build 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And the text never really explains why is this the offer that he makes. It says this. It's clear that he's interrupting. Peter's like the person in the movie theaters who's constantly interrupting the plot. And asking questions and making comments. And who is this? Like, that's what Peter's doing to the story. The story has this amazing progression. And Peter goes, hang on. Let's stop and let's build tents. Let's make this official. Now a tent, not like a camping tent, right? This is more like, you think of like the tabernacle in the desert. Okay, God, if your physical presence is going to be manifested here, we, just like the tabernacle, contained your glory, contained your presence, not contained, but was the place for it, is probably a better way to say that, right? Just like the tabernacle was that, well, let's pull a page out of that playbook and let's do that. But it's not 100% clear why he makes this offer, and honestly, it's not the point. They don't come back to this in the story, but the plot thickens anyway. Verse 5, right after Peter interrupts God, God interrupts Peter. This cloud surrounds them and a voice speaks to them from the cloud. This idea of a cloud and a voice, this brings us back to God descending on Mount Sinai. They've been wandering through the wilderness. They get out to the peninsula there. They get out to the mountain. They're told to stay off the mountain. It's just Moses and a few people who are able to go up, and this cloud descends. The cloud also reminds of his presence in the wilderness, leading them through the wilderness as a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. This cloud reminds us of when he fills the temple with his presence or filled the tabernacle with his presence. The cloud was there. God spoke to Elijah on a mountain. And in that event, this includes the ground rumbling and an earthquake and a windstorm and fire. And so we're seeing how much meaning is kind of impregnated into these symbols, into these stories. They are standing on holy ground indeed, because God is here. Not just externally in what they're seeing and hearing, but they're witnessing God through Jesus. This voice comes, the voice from the cloud speaks. What the voice from the cloud says, it's largely a repetition of what was said back in the scene of the baptism. I don't think this is by accident. He says, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. This is a paraphrasing, a joining of Psalm 2 and Isaiah 42:1. Psalm 2 teaches us that the Messiah is the actual son. Psalm 2:7 says, I will tell of the decree, the Lord said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Isaiah shows that the Messiah is also the suffering servant. So here we have the son from Psalm 2. We have the suffering servant from Isaiah 42:1. It says, behold my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I put my spirit on him. He will bring forth justice for the nations. So here this voice says, this is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased. This joining of these two phrases, he is both son and suffering servant. And the next line is, listen to him. This is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. This word is intentional. Deuteronomy 18:15 says, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me. This is Moses speaking. He will raise up a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. These are intentional words. The presence of Elijah and Moses and the voice of God here. We have Moses representing the law and Elijah representing the prophets, and God is saying, listen to them. He might say, look, listen to them like you would listen to Elijah or listen to a Moses. Listen to them in this way. Listen to him in this way. They were well trained in understanding, hear the words of the law. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. To those who were really dedicated, they would have the law memorized. They would have it on rote memory, being able to quote it. They were well trained to understand as righteous people, we should be listening to the words of the prophets. We should be, when they call us back to repentance, we should be obeying, we should be following. And this voice is saying, look, this is my beloved son. Listen to him. Follow him just like you would these other two. This scene, you can sense just how thick it is with meaning. There's this connection back to Moses, but all the way back to Exodus 24. I want to show a couple of verses there. We see where Moses goes up on a mountain, and in verse 15 it says, then Moses went up on the mountain. We see where it's covered with a cloud, verse 15 again, and the cloud covered the mountain. We see where this covering lasted 6 days in verse 16. The glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai and covered it 6 days. And on the 7th, he called out to Moses in the midst of the cloud. There's the voice calling out to him. Even down to the shining face of Moses. This is after the event when Moses comes down from the mountain. Exodus 34:29 says, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, he came down from the mountain. Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. Being in God's presence, his skin was shining. The people were obviously disturbed by this. They made him wear a veil so that they didn't have to look at him like this. Moses, going up to the mountain, he brings 3 key leaders. Moses said in verse 24:1 says, come up to the Lord, you, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. So these 3 go up with Moses. Those who were there are the ones who saw God. Exodus 24:10, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. All of these motifs, all these ideas, the 3 disciples, the mountains, the cloud, the vision, the voice, all of these are back in Exodus 24, are kind of being reanimated and displayed for them here. How do the disciples respond? Look at verse 6. The disciples fall on their faces in fear. They're obviously terrified. Peter is trying to sort of end the interaction quickly, going, hey, conclusion, can we just build some tabernacles and kind of move this where we don't have to experience this? To us, it sounds amazing, hey, let's interact with God. But all throughout Israel's history, the direct interaction with God was not something that they had. As New Testament believers, we experience God in a way being indwelt by the Holy Spirit that they didn't have. They had to access through the priest. For us, who's our high priest? Our high priest is Jesus. This is where we have access. So we have access in a way that doesn't require going to temple, that doesn't require a priesthood. But to not have that all of a sudden, to be experiencing God in a way that you don't think you should maybe have access to, this would be a terrifying moment. And I think they're sensing that. They're falling on their faces in fear. Whenever you hear these people go on about visions of angels and having seen stuff and they're not afraid, they're probably lying. Look through the Bible, examples in the Bible. Every time there's an angel present or some manifestation of God and his power, the first response everyone has is this response right here: fall down on your face in fear. And usually the first words are exactly what Jesus says next, which is, don't be afraid, get back up. So when someone says, hey, I saw this angel, and they have this very uppity attitude about it, you can probably be certain that they're at least making a story up or just had bad pizza or something. But Jesus touches them. I think so they know that he's real, right? There's one more sense activated. Jesus touches them and brings them back up out of this. There's this rich scene of headlining Old Testament characters, Moses representing the law, Elijah representing the prophets. And now this scene returns to the original plot, and everyone is looking at who? Look at the end of verse 8. When they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. No one but Jesus only. That's a little bit awkward wording, right? The English actually preserves the word order of the Greek here in our Bibles, which a lot of times the translators sort of massage the word order because it's different, kind of like the difference between English and Spanish and putting the modifiers and the nouns in reverse positions. It doesn't sound like English if you follow the Spanish word pattern and vice versa. Greek word pattern can be significantly different than English pattern. And here the translators chose to go with the Greek pattern because the Greek pattern is very, very specific. They saw Jesus only. They're in the presence of, imagine to be a Jew and to be in the presence of Moses. It's like for us as an American to be in the presence of George Washington. If George Washington appeared here, how cool would that be? As an American, that's pretty cool. He's our founding father. He's the guy. And here, for a Jew, you've got Moses appearing, and you have Elijah appearing. But at the end of this, they are gone, and who is it? It is Jesus only. All of these people show up, and Jesus is the fulfillment of these two. Matthew's been making the case from the early pages till now that Jesus fulfills not just the prophets and what is prophesied, but he fulfills the law and what it intends. Here, he's doing this symbolically where both of these two show up representing the law and the prophets, and Jesus is the one who is left standing there. The disciples are to understand Jesus is the one they are to follow. He is the one that they are to obey. Now, with all of this special revelation happening for these three disciples, we have one more strange moment, and that's verse 9. As they're coming down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." Tell no one. This is what some scholars call the messianic secret. There's 5 times in Matthew that Jesus told people not to mention what they had seen or heard or what they understood about him. The first 3 of these references are in connection to various healing miracles that were done. Jesus heals the leopard and he heals the 2 blind men. Jesus heals many people after a confrontation with the Pharisees about healing a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath. And in all of those 3 events, Jesus would say, hey, don't go tell anyone about what happened. The 4th time is in chapter 16 where Peter realizes who Jesus is. Jesus, who do you say that I am? You're Christ, Son of the living God. And Jesus' response is, okay, God has revealed this to you, but don't tell anyone. And here we see the final repeat of this. This baffles a lot of people as to why this would be happening. Why does Jesus tell people not to share? With all these early examples, it's not clear why Jesus is saying this. People speculate, but he doesn't really say why until this final time. Tell no one until, now we're given the reason, until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. Don't announce that you know that I'm the Messiah prematurely. Wait until I am raised from the dead, and then go tell everyone. Why would a premature announcement be banned? What would this premature announcement do? This announcement, he'd be like a lightning rod for the masses who would want to make him king. Oh, you're saying the next guy is gathering troops out in the desert and he's saying he's the Messiah. Oh, great, let's go. Let's go do this. They would expect him to fight the Romans. They would expect him to cleanse the land of everyone who had been compromised by the Roman Empire. Without being willing to fulfill that cultural expectation, and in the absence of some other story, some greater story as to why he wouldn't fulfill that, the disciples would have sounded certifiably crazy to the throngs of people. Just imagine this scene. The disciples come and say, hey, Jesus, we found out, we understand now, he's actually the Messiah. Not a Messiah, he is the Messiah. He's the one. Really? Okay, where's his army? Hey, who are we going to attack? What's the battle plan? Well, hang on. He doesn't actually have an army, and we're not attacking anyone. Okay. So what's he going to do? Oh, this is the cool part. He's going to go and he's going to suffer an excruciating criminal's death in Jerusalem at the hands of the religious leaders. What? That's not an answer, right? So to say, hey, he's the Messiah, all of a sudden, who the Messiah is in the mind of the commoner is raised. And then you hear what they've just been learning about him, that his messiahship starts with suffering and death and then resurrection and has nothing to do with armies and kingdoms and the Romans, at least not in that moment. You start sounding like a crazy person, particularly when he hasn't died yet. You're saying, oh, this man has promised that he's going to die and going to be raised again. Look, I was in Texas during the Waco David Koresh years where we heard this lunatic raving about being the Messiah and how he was going to be killed and raised from the dead, right? You sound like a crazy person when you say this stuff. Now, after the fact, it's a whole different story. Not for David Koresh, but for Jesus, it's a whole different story. Early announcements would have led people to try to make him king, and they would have been disillusioned when he didn't accept. But after the resurrection, the central point of his message would have been clear to everyone. It would have been clear how he was going to establish his kingly reign and what that meant through his death and burial and resurrection, that he was going to conquer death itself, not just some temporal, lowly Roman Empire. After the resurrection, there would have been undeniable proof that even though he didn't fit their cultural model for who the Messiah should be, that he had power like no other to back up his otherworldly and oftentimes upside down message. After the resurrection, there would be no questions about it. But right now, you would just sound like a lunatic. The other connection we have in this text is the Elijah connection. Verse 10, the disciples start peppering Jesus with questions, and they asked him, hey, then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? And he answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. So the Pharisees have this understanding that Elijah is going to come as the forerunner to the Messiah and as a frontrunner to the day of the Lord, the day of judgment. God returning in his power to set everything right. This happens at the end of Malachi 4-5. This references actually not only Elijah, but also Moses. And so, again, rich with meaning of joining these two characters being symbolic of the law and the prophets. Malachi 4-5 says, remember the law of my servant Moses, the statutes and rules that I commanded him at Horeb for all Israel. Behold, I will send Elijah the prophets before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. This is the promise that he is going to send Elijah. But Jesus, in this conversation he's having in the text, is, hey, Elijah does come. Also, Elijah has already come. Wait, he does come, future, but he has already come. It's already happened. This is one of these already but not yet kind of paradoxes about the faith. This is actually part of how prophecy works. There's certain prophecies that have more than one fulfillment. They have an initial fulfillment or kind of a prefiguring of the actual and final fulfillment of something. In certain cases, this is clear when it's happening in the text. It's very clear of, hey, this happened, just like the case of we're talking about here. John the Baptist is Elijah, but also Jesus is saying there's still an Elijah to come. There still is the one that you're thinking about when you think about this. This is actually why we need to be careful about being dogmatic about end times theology, is sometimes prophecy works this way, where if you just imagine a stack of objects, from the side we can see all the objects, but we don't actually have the side view of prophecy. We have the view like this where, I can't see here, but all of you can. And so we have to be careful about being too dogmatic of this prophecy has to mean this and only this, or there's always a second, fulfillment. We don't know any of this. Prophecy shows us something that I think makes sense either as it's happening or as we're looking back at it. But Jesus is saying the original prophecy is going to be fulfilled. If you're reading Micah, that's still going to happen. Elijah will come. He's going to herald the day of the Lord. It's going to happen. Right? Revelation 11 talks about two witnesses who are going to come. A lot of people think that one of those is most likely going to be Elijah. And so that would be a very clean way for the Malachi 4 prophecy to be fulfilled in Revelation. But he's also saying again what he said several times already. In a different sense, John the Baptist is Elijah. And the day of the Lord, though it's not the day of the Lord yet, it's here, right? It's here in the presence of Jesus. And Elijah is here in the presence of John the Baptist. This is kind of a forerunner, the day of the Lord that he's heralding, the arrival of the Messiah, the arrival of Jesus. In both of these connections, Elijah and with Moses, they point to the same thing, that Jesus is here. He is the one to follow. He is the Messiah. He is the suffering servant. He's the beloved Son. And here we see he's God come to earth. We say that phrase a lot, Jesus is God. And I think intellectually, cognitively, that makes sense. I think when we kind of circle back to the question of, why is this text in here? It helps us understand that for us, that is largely information that lives in our brain, right? I'm not saying we don't believe it. I'm not saying it's not real to us. I'm just saying it's intellectual information. It's sort of like if you told me and explained to me what infinity means. Okay, I understand the words coming out of your mouth, but can I really grasp that many? No, I can't. Not really. I probably can't even grasp a million. I see math teachers, do that thing where they have a million dots on a page just so students can actually see what does a million of anything look like, right? Jesus is God. I understand the words, but I think the three of them standing there watching all of this experientially goes, oh, I feel this now. I understand at this deeper level what is happening. So what does this mean for us? Sometimes the transfiguration seems like this historic event that's sort of like a little bit out there in the clouds, literally. But the transfiguration is for Jesus' disciples. It's for these three. Jesus was never confused about who he was. Jesus always knew who he was, why he came, what he was there to do. He already knew he was the beloved Son. All these declarations, these public declarations in the baptism and now here, these aren't for Jesus' sake. They're for the sake of those standing around going, what do we do with this guy? I mean, he's a cool guy. We like him. He seems really nice. He has a good crowd. He's got a great presence. He helps the poor. It's for their sake to go, no. He's all those things. Nothing wrong with those things, but he's so much more than those things. This story we have here, it's this very abnormal story in the plot. But the transfiguration is for the disciples. He's transfigured before them. He didn't do it by himself. Could have happened like the wilderness temptation by himself. That was for him, I believe. But this was for them. The voice spoke to them. That's what the text says. It uses the pronoun them. The voice is speaking to them, not to Jesus. It's not for his benefit. It's for them to see and understand. Remember, Jesus has just said, take up your cross and follow me. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going to Jerusalem. To do what? Oh, to die. Hey, you want to come? Bring your cross with you. Let's go die together. Right? How do you convince people to do that? How do you convince people that it's okay if we die together now because this life is not all that there is? Well, I think this transfiguration is a moment where they're seeing, oh, this is not just the words of a really radical, zealous person who's ready to die for a cause. These are not martyrs' words. These are words of God in the flesh who is promising us the life to come and is showing us by his own death and burial and resurrection that this is what happens for us. But the transfiguration is not just this historic event that was just for them. The transfiguration is for us today. We can be transfigured. Not can be, we're commanded to be. I read Romans 12, 1 and 2 earlier. I appeal to you, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice. That sounds like different words for deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. Holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Here's the command, do not be conformed to this world. Other command, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. That by testing you may discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. It's not just we can be transfigured, This is available to us. Jesus is telling us to be transfigured. Ours is not going to be we're going to shine like light as we walk down the street. Thank goodness. It should be this inward thing where God is taking those things that we can't conquer on our own, and he is transforming them. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of times where I hit a problem in my life where I've spent a lot of time trying to overcome, getting a lot of help to overcome, and at some point it becomes apparent I am helpless to actually overcome this by myself. I'm helpless to change my heart. I'm helpless to love an enemy. I'm helpless to forgive. These are things that are otherworldly. These are divine acts. I need him to transform my inward being so that I can do those. Transfiguration, it's not just a command for us, it's ultimate for us. Philippians 3:21 says, Jesus, who will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body by the power that enables him even to subject all things to himself. He's saying, look, we have to go through this process if we are to be with him. 1 Corinthians 15, it's a chapter on the resurrection. Verse 51 says, behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable. This mortal body must put on immortality. Transfiguration, it's a must for us. It's a promise to us that this is going to happen. Throughout the scriptures, we understand that there's this change, a transfiguration that not only applies to Jesus, but in a different way applies to us. This should thrill us. This is what I think when we go into the pages of Acts, this is what gave those same disciples the courage to stand up to leaders in prison and say, we have to obey God rather than man. I think this, having seen this and having understood that this is not just the ravings of a really good but just zealously, awkward person, but this is actually God himself. That's what gave them the courage to say things like, to live is Christ and to die is gain while locked in prison. Understanding who Jesus is. The third piece of this in terms of application is this idea of Jesus only. They saw him only. There's all these important things around, and yet when all of the dust settles, when the scene clears, it's Jesus only that they see. And so here's my question is for you this morning is, has Jesus been transfigured before you? Not in the historic event, right? But we read the scriptures. We see all of the information about who Jesus is. We understand he's a historic person. We understand there's these stories about him. We understand the movement that started because of him must have meant that these stories were compelling. But has there been a moment in your life where you actually see Jesus for who he really is? If you're just seeing the stories of a man who did a lot of great things and who was very selfless, who even died for his cause, you haven't seen the real Jesus. We have to know him as more than just some itinerant teacher or just some rabbi, just some do-gooder. We have to see him for who he is. He is God with us. Let's pray. Jesus, I pray for all of us that we would see you for who you truly are. Whatever image we have, whatever the distance is between our cognitive, intellectual understanding of you and that way in which it becomes alive in us and that way in which it reshapes our life and that way in which it gave the early apostles this boldness to face death without fear. I pray that we would know you in this way, that we would know your suffering so we can know the power of your resurrection, not as intellectual knowings, but in a way that gives us life in the here and now, in a way that gives us your power in the here and now, in a way that gives us boldness to proclaim that you are the one that we should follow.